con l'Asia e con l'Africa del Nord, ed è stato in particolare uno degli autori leader del quarto rapporto di valutazione del Comitato Intergovernativo per i cambiamenti climatici, l'IPCC, che ha preso il premio Nobel e quindi è in parte, insieme a molti altri, credo, ma è un pezzo di premio Nobel che abbiamo qui al tavolo e che invito a parlare. Axel Michaelowa parlerà in inglese.
Molte grazie. Sorry, I don't speak Italian, so you have to live with English language. But as we are talking about markets, there are still a lot of chairs in the front. So for those who are standing, move ahead, about 15 chairs, and they don't cost anything. So it's free lunch, and you should really take the chance, and I'll wait for 2 minutes that you really take the chance to move in front, because I know from my own time as being students sitting or standing in the last row, you don't see and hear anything, you don't learn anything. So please take the opportunity, really 15 chairs for free, so more chance. Just move along. Okay, well, so I will talk about the market-based instruments in climate policy. I will first describe what has been decided by the Kyoto Protocol. There are 3 main mechanisms, and here they have different characteristics and different degree of maturity. It's not working. Then I will discuss. Okay. Grazie. Then I will describe what is the situation on the international market, who is delivering supply to the market, who is having the demand, and what the price levels are. And of course, this is the heart of the market as it stands. And then I will describe what may be the future of the market, especially in the climate policy after the year 2012. There are 4 mechanisms in the Kyoto Protocol which have the characteristics of a market. The first one, it's a very primitive one because you can only trade once. It's the so-called bubble, where countries can rearrange their targets. And that has been done by the European Union, which had an overall target of 8% reduction, and which redistributed the target between 28% reduction in the case of Luxembourg to an increase of 25% in the case of Portugal. But they could do it only once, and so that is not a real market. The second mechanism is called joint implementation. It is for projects in other countries that have taken up emission commitments. There are 2 ways to do it. One is very free, but it can only be done by those countries that fulfill all the requirements of reporting under the Kyoto Protocol, which are tough requirements. And then there is one which has a system of checks and balances, the so-called second track. And then there is a third mechanism, which will be the main part of my talk, because it's the mechanism which has developed the most, which is called the Clean Development Mechanism. It is about projects in developing countries that reduce emissions, for which you can then get emission credits even if the developing countries themselves do not have any commitments under the Kyoto Protocol. And it was the first thing of the Kyoto Protocol to start seriously, because it could already start from 1st of January 2000, whereas all the other commitments of Kyoto Protocol only come into force on the 1st of January 2008. And then there's a fourth mechanism, which is the pure emissions trading on a government-to-government basis. But this has not yet been developed to any substantial extent. Now I will again describe you the differences of these mechanisms. Here you see two countries, two industrialized countries that have commitments under the Kyoto, and these are framed as an emission budget. So you are not allowed to emit more than this budget for the country. And if you do joint implementation or emissions trading, you take a part of that budget and sell it to another country. So essentially it's a zero-sum game. You take away a part in one side and add it to the other side. Whereas the clean development mechanism, it adds to the whole system. The so-called certified emission reductions from CDM, they come from the countries that are not part of the Kyoto commitments. So this, of course, means that there is the inherent danger of bringing in some emission reductions that dilute the whole process. And a lot of discussions that have come up are due to these characteristics of the CDM. Now, before we get into the project-based market, I want to discuss one very important aspect. There is a question of so-called hot air. What does it mean? It means that the countries in transition had a strong decrease in emissions due to the economic restructuring. In many countries, emissions fell by 30, 40, or even 50%. And emissions have started to increase a bit since about the year 2000, but it is clear that they will never reach the level which is allowed under the Kyoto Protocol. So what happens is that these countries have a huge surplus in their emissions budget, which they can sell, of course, theoretically at a very low price. And this is an element which, of course, generates a lot of problems in the market because, as you will see on the next slide, the volume of this hot air is immense. Any of the bars pointing to the left-hand side is a surplus. And you see the green bar for Russia, the dark green bar for Ukraine, and the dark blue bar for the new member countries of the EU. And you see that this is much more than the demand that comes from Western Europe, from Canada and Japan. So if we had a fully working market, then the price would be zero because there's a surplus overhang. Fortunately, this has not happened so far because Russia, Ukraine, and Eastern Europe have not sold their surplus. And they didn't find many buyers, and I will discuss this in detail at a later point. But this is a big legacy which will generate a lot of trouble in the market in the medium term. Then, of course, we have now the real demand, the demand for the credits from the project-based mechanisms CDM and JI. And here on this, you see the overall repartition of the demand in the different categories. You see the quarter to the top right, which are all the funds that are administered by the multilateral development banks. And Claudia Croce will describe what the World Bank is doing in this field, so you'll get a first-hand account on this segment. The second segment, lower down, is governments that know that they have a Kyoto gap and have to close it. Interestingly, the Italian government so far has not budgeted nearly sufficient enough money to close its gap. So if Italy wants to close its gap, it needs to commit much more money to buy the emission credits. And then you see the rest, which is about 50% of the whole demand on the left-hand side. These are private banks and financial institutions that have set up vehicles to acquire such emission credits. And if you sum up this, it's about 8 billion euro. So it's a substantial amount of money, and it's changing quickly. Just, for example, if you see the red bar in the government section, it's Norway. The 500 million euro have just been announced 2 weeks ago. So still this is changing a lot, and the picture may look very different in 3 months from now. What has actually been traded on those markets so far? Here you see the overall size of the market and the shares of the different components. You see that the market has expanded very quickly. In 2004 it was less than 100 million, and in the first 6 months of 2007 alone it was more than 1 billion tons of CO2. So exponential growth and no sign of abating. And what you also see on this is the dark blue part, which is the share of the European emission trading scheme. This has so far the lion's share of the transactions. Then you see the yellow elements, which is the clean development mechanism. The blue element, the light blue element, is joint implementation. And you see that then there are some gray elements. These are the voluntary markets in the United States and Australia. So the lion's share of the market currently is Europe and clean development mechanism. Now, the clean development mechanism, as I said, started early. Of course, it did not really start in 2000, but it started seriously about 2003, 2004. The first, here on this slide, you see how many projects were submitted to the UN body supervising the system every month. And you see that this has increased considerably over the last 3 years. It started at the end of 2003, and for about 1.5 years it was just a trickle, and then suddenly it started to take off. And it took off at a point in time where there was a slight change of rule, which was extremely important, because it was decided that you would not need a participant from an industrialized country and a participant from a developing country to set up such a project, but that it could be done by a developer in a developing country on its own. And this mobilized a lot of entrepreneurial activity in Brazil, China, and India, and then suddenly this started to really take off, and now it is an extremely hot market with about 800 projects that have got the formal stamp of approval of the UN, and another 1,600 projects waiting for this approval. Now there is one key issue in the context of the clean development mechanism. I told you that there are no commitments for those countries. So intrinsically, there is an incentive for somebody in a developing country just to, show that apparently he's doing something to reduce emissions, but in reality he's not doing anything, but he's just doing his ordinary course of business. And therefore, there has been the introduction of a concept which is called additionality. Additionality means that you have to answer the question whether a project would happen under a normal course of business or whether it has been mobilized by the incentive of the clean development mechanism, the money which comes in through the sale of the emission reduction credit. And for this, the rule-making body, the so-called executive board, the EB, has developed a test. And this test wants to answer exactly the question, which are the projects that happen anyway, and which are the projects that happen due to the CDM incentive. And in this test, you first look what are the alternatives that exist to such a project. You then can check the financials of those alternatives, which are the most attractive ones in terms of profitability. Or you can do a test where you prove that there is a lot of barriers that prevent your project from being implemented. And of course, these barriers have to be non-financial. Otherwise, you would be able to do this investment analysis. And if you have found out that your project is not the most attractive financially, or that it has these barriers, then you check what is actually happening in the country where the project is being done. And of course, if you find a lot of projects of the same type that have already been done, then your case is not very credible. On the basis of this test, so far 14 of the projects that have been submitted to the UN body, which is doing the regulation, have been rejected, which is about 3% of the proposals that were done during this time period. So currently, at least in numerical terms, it's not a big issue, but it may become more important because there are indications that the regulatory body is doing some checks not sufficiently in a sufficiently rigorous manner. This graph shows you the amount of emission reductions that has been achieved by the CDM. And again, you see exponential growth. And you also see that it's mainly two countries that are responsible for this growth. That is China and India. And interestingly, China was a latecomer. You see that in the initial time until 2005, there was no project from China at all. But it has come up very strongly, and you will get about 50, 60 projects from China every month. And the total value is 2 billion emission reduction credits approximately. Of course, the question is how many emission reduction credits will come up in the next 2-3 years, because if this continues in that speed, you may have almost 3 billion credits, and then the question is who is really buying these credits given the situation of the big surplus from Russia and Ukraine. What are the types of these activities? And this is a big surprise, because initially everybody thought it would be renewable energy, it would be energy efficiency, but what came out is one category which is a very strange way of reducing greenhouse gases. Essentially, it's a chemical process where you produce a certain material called HCFC22, which is a refrigerant, and in that process you produce another gas called HFC23, which is a very strong greenhouse gas. So a plant that produces a few 10,000 tons of the original product can generate 10 million greenhouse gas reduction credits. And it's not very expensive to build a plant that burns this gas stream. So these projects, mainly in China, have generated already millions of these reduction credits, and they form the black part of the slide. But now all the plants that can do this technology have implemented, so it's plateauing. Whereas the renewable energies, the red part, they are expanding very quickly. Again, every month we get 20, 30 hydropower plants from China being submitted to the international regulatory body. But you also see that there are certain project types which are currently not at all represented. For example, transport. fuel switch or modal shift in transport. That is due to the fact that the calculation of emission reductions for those project types is difficult and that the regulatory body has not been able to decide on the calculation methodologies for that type of projects. When you talk about markets, of course, the critical issue is the price. A market is driven by the price, and this graph shows you that there is not a single price. There's many different prices because the price depends on the type of commodity that you sell. And in the CDM market, as you have many different steps of regulation that you have to fulfill, the price depends on the status of your project within this regulatory series of steps. So if you start from the yellow bar is the price of the European Union emission allowances, which is generated by completely EU internal regulation. So formally it has nothing to do with Kyoto Protocol, but it is a big price driver because a company in the EU can use the certificates from CDM and joint implementation to fulfill the commitments under the European trading scheme. Therefore, at least theoretically, one emission reduction credit from a CDM project is equal to one European allowance. But you see here that the price is not equal. The reason is that so far it's not entirely clear how the transfer of these emission credits in the European Union registries is being done. I think the risk is relatively low, but still the market discounts the emission reduction credit. And then, of course, the dark green bar shows you the price for those emission reduction credits which have already been issued, which mean that project is operating, it has been checked by an independent auditor, and the international regulatory body has given the stamp of approval. Therefore, this is the highest category. It's an emission credit which can immediately be used. There are, of course, many projects that are still at early stages but already want to sell their credits under a so-called forward contract. And for those forward contracts, you get the low prices in the bluish and on the left-hand side. For example, if you have a project where you don't even know the calculation methodology for the reduction, you may get €3 or even less because there's a big risk that this methodology will not be accepted by the regulator and that eventually your project may have underperformance of the production of the emission reduction credits. But still you see the prices, even of the low categories, have increased over time, and that the big driver has been the price for the European allowance. Now, regarding the two other types of Kyoto mechanisms, for joint implementation, we have a defined set of rules which is similar to the CDM for this track where the countries do not have to do all the reporting. You need an approval from a country which buys the credits, and the big problem are the host country institutions. Russia, for example, for 3 years was not able to set up a law which defines how these emission reduction credits are generated in Russia. Ukraine has defined the rules, but still the institutional uncertainty is relevant and high. And interestingly, in terms of the numbers of projects, Germany is the country with the highest number of projects under development. But the big problem is, again, that you don't know whether these projects would not have happened under the German subsidy system for renewable energy anyway, so they currently don't get approval by the German regulator. Then there has been an idea to mobilize this hot air from Russia, Ukraine, through a so-called green investment scheme. This means that the revenue from the sale of the emission credits is put into projects that reduce emissions, so it's not just spent for consumptive purposes. The problem is that, of course, there is no real interest in the countries to implement such systems. So currently it's a bit on hold. There has been some little purchasing by some EU countries of the so-called assigned amount units, the hot air from Russia. Bulgaria tried to sell 25 million, but so far the deal has not been signed. And Romania has sold 10 million. And recently there was some discussion about a Dutch acquisition from Latvia, again 10 million. But compared to the CDM market, it's very, very small. So, as you have seen from the price graph, the linking of the CDM to the EU system has been the key driver. Earlier we had the World Bank and the Dutch government, which were the only buyers, and of course in this situation they were able to set the price, because if you only have one or two buyers, they can dictate the price. That's very clear. And somehow they decided that $3 would be a good price, so the initial deals were done at that price. But now, of course, the market is much broader, as we have seen. We have one problematic element, at least at first glance, that the countries of the EU have had to set a maximum threshold up to which the credits from CDM and JI can be imported. But this threshold is not really binding. It's possible for all the countries in the EU to import about 1.5 billion tons of CO2 equivalent, but the shortage of the European system in the period between 2008 and 2012 is probably only 1 to 1.2 billion. So this will be more than sufficient to close the gap. The problem is that there are still some barriers. In Germany, for example, there is some extra checks on the CDM projects by the regulatory body. Therefore, people and companies are reluctant to submit projects. And Canada and Japan, so far, they need a lot to close their Kyoto gaps, but they've not done anything to really mobilize private action. Just yesterday, the Canadian government said we are not willing to fulfill our Kyoto commitments, which of course means they don't want to buy anything abroad. So Canada is currently the bad guy in the Kyoto Protocol and is reducing the demand for the mechanisms. Now, before I conclude, how will this develop further? We have the start of the negotiations for the post-2012 climate policy now in December in Bali at the Conference of the Parties. And essentially there are two main options for the post-2012 regime. One is to continue on the Kyoto path, and the second one is to shift to a technology-based regime. All the signs of the political debates that we currently see show that the technology solution is not taken very seriously. So it's very likely that we will have a continuation of the Kyoto-style regime with quantitative commitments, maybe for a larger group of countries, and then, of course, also project-based market mechanisms. And this can also be seen in the confidence in the CDM, because if people would really think that after 2012 the whole regime collapses, people would stop developing projects under the CDM, because the time in which they can generate the emission reduction credits before 2012 gets shorter and shorter. But as you have seen, the project pipeline is increasing consistently over time. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you.